In this video we will take a look at the tar command. Tar stands for tape archiver, and although the sound of it is probably not what you're imagining, it's extremely useful for saving files, that is for backing up files, and also for distributing files using the network. So you will still find lots of software packages that are in tar format and available for download all over the internet. Okay, so tar or tape archiver is used to copy a set of files into a single file called a tar file. Although you might think that the important thing is compression and where does that fit in? Well, tar by itself usually is not used for compression. It's used just to create one file, usually a tar file, from a whole set of files. So that's the main use of the tar command. Another thing to note is that we no longer use tape archives as commonly as we used to because disk space is so cheap and so plentiful, and so this first part of the notes is probably not going to be useful unless you have a tape device. So if you had a tape device, it would be /dev/something. In this case, in the example in the book is /dev/ctape1. And the way you would take all the contents of, let's say, the current directory and store it to a tape device would be by using a command like this. So if you had a tape device, this would work. Most of us don't, and so chances are you are not going to have to use this. But you would say tar minus, and these are the options, C for create, V for verbose, and F for the name of the file, where the destination, where the archive is going to go. So in this case, the F refers to the /dev/ctape1. And then finally, at the very end of that is where you say what directory you want to save to this archive. So in this particular case, this is an example where you would use the tar command to write a complete directory and all of its subdirectories and all the files in all of the subdirectories recursively to this output, and it would go as one single file to this tape device. Okay, so archive, this command will archive all the files in your current directory and subdirectories and so on recursively into a single tar file. It'll go on tape. So it packs files from your current directory, so it's represented by dot, into a single tar file, sends it to the device ctape1. So like I said, most of us don't have tape devices anymore, and so we're not likely to use it this way. What we still use this tar command for is to create that one single file out of many, many files. So this is extremely useful even now. If you had one of those free cloud storage accounts, you could still create a tape archive and then upload that instead of uploading one single file at a time. So it's still tremendously useful. So most of the time we will use it in this format. So this command archives current directory into an actual file on the current in your workspace, in your directory space, and this particular command is saying create, and in verbose mode, this tar file, that is /tar/projects.tar, and create a copy of everything in the current directory. Okay, so typically this is how you would use this tar command to create tar files. So let's take a quick example. So I have a bunch of files here. What I typically do let's say I wanted to create a complete copy of this Android workstation or workspace. What I would do is tar minus cbf, and you can try this with your live DVD. You should have the same files. Android workspace. Oops, wrong order. I'll say android.tar. Okay, so tar create in verbose mode to this file, android.tar, this existing directory. So this is the order. You have to, whatever you want to tar, let's say in this case the Android workspace folder, that's at the end, and then the tar file comes after the options. Okay, so this gave me a huge list of files, and it listed out all of these things only because we used the verbose mode. So there's a lot of files. Okay, so once again, tar minus C to create, V for verbose, that's why we got all of this, and F is the name of the file that we're tarring to, which comes after the options, and then finally the thing that you want to tar, tape archive. If you want to, once you're comfortable with using tar, you can skip the V option, and then you get a nice output-free tar. If you go to ls minus L, sure enough, there's a huge folder. In this case, it is about 19 megabytes. One thing to note is that tarring actually uses up more space than the original in, let's say, workspace. You can check that by using the du command, and you'll use bytes. Okay, so in this case, notice that the original directory had 18, if I'm reading that right, almost 19 megabytes, and this is a tiny bit more, so it's not that bad. So you might say, what is the advantage in using tar? Well, the advantage is, instead of having to somehow take each file and save that somewhere one by one, you now have one file that has all of the contents and all of the subdirectories recursively for an entire folder. So that's the advantage of using tar. Okay, so take a look, try this out. Normally this is how you would use it. Just looking at this, I probably would not do this. Just looking at it's not. I don't think that's a good idea. Probably not a good example. You can try it, see what happens. Problem that I see there, just to go back, is that you are tarring the current directory and putting the result into some place in your current directory, which is, now that I think about it, is not a good idea. So I would avoid that. Instead, use something like this. You can tar to the current directory something in the current directory, but these don't conflict. So this tar file is not going to go inside this directory, as is the case in this example. You're tarring the current directory and putting the result in someplace inside that current directory. Not a good idea. Okay, so the name of the tar file can be any valid Unix name, and here the extension.tar is added for clarity and is not a necessity. So that's always the case on Macs, on Linux. If you have a tar command, you don't really have to say something.tar. That's just for your own ease of use. So once again, you can say -C to create. You don't have to use the V. That just gives you a verbose output. In this case, if you don't use the V, you just get your prompt, unless you have an error message. Once you have a tar file, you can actually list the contents. And so in that case, so the way you do that is to say tar -T. So if you have a tar file, the T gives you a table of all the things in that. Oops, I don't need this last one. Okay, so tar -T gives you a table of all the things that are in this tar file. And like we saw, there's a huge number of things in this particular case. Another thing I want to mention briefly is that the jar files, which most of you might have used, the idea for jar files comes from tar. So tar preceded jar files. Tar files preceded jar files by 20 years. And so the idea is the same. You create, in this case, in a jar file, you create a Java archive, which an archive with the with a whole bunch of Java files, all the source code, but it's mainly used to actually create a runnable code, so that you just start up the jar file and the program runs from within that jar file, from within the Java archive file. Okay, so then you might say, well, I can see the contents of a tar file by using the -T option, but how do I now that I've created this tar file, how do I extract all the contents? Okay, so we'll take a look at that in just a second. But notice here, if you do a tar -T VF, you get something like this. Let's try it with the verbose option, and you get all of the information like you would with an ls-l. You get the permissions and whether it's a file or a folder, that is a directory. You get the owner, the group, size, the date, and then date and time, and finally the name. Okay, so those are the different meanings of the different columns. And for tar -tvf, you would get the same kind of output as ls-l. So once you have a tar file, how do you extract it? So the way to do it is to say tar -x. So once you use the x option, you can extract the files. Unfortunately, what happens is that you extract files to the current folder, and so you want to be careful because you can really mess up your folder system by extracting it to some place where that you don't want to. So what I do is to test it. So now that I have a tar file, I do a make dir test, and I cd to that test folder. Okay, so now I'm in test, and now I'm a little bit safer. I can say tar -xvf, and I can go down or up to the parent folder and untar that, and then can untar it to right here. It's a whole bunch of stuff, and I've essentially made a copy of my Android workspace in my test folder. If I had done that in the parent folder, I would have wiped out probably this existing folder, which is what I tarred anyway. Or I might have extracted a whole bunch of files into my home folder, which can really mess up your folder. So that's a quick introduction to tar. Tar -C to create, tar -T to give you a table, and tar -X to extract files. You can also use the long options, --create, --verbose, and so on.